Welcome to Storytelling. This week's guest is an author, educator and trainer who has spent more than 30 years teaching and lecturing on Black history, African world studies and entrepreneurship. His expertise has reached schools, universities, community spaces and global corporations, including Jaguar Land Rover, Shelter and the Phoenix Group, as well as the African Union in Addis Ababa. He was named one of Britain's 100 most influential Black people and continues to inspire thousands through his groundbreaking courses and education ventures. Widely recognised as the Black History Man, please welcome Robin Walker. Hello, Robin, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good to know.
Robin, if we were to start at the very beginning, what should everyone know about Africa's role as the birthplace of humanity and civilization?
What everybody should know is that one of the African countries, Ethiopia, has branded itself the land of origins. If you listen to the different politicians, you listen to people like the ambassador and so on, I've met some of these people. Everybody's on code, and the on code thing to say is land of origin. So when it comes to some of the earlier forms of humanity, all the way up to the beginnings of modern humanity, a lot of the fossils were found in Ethiopia. So Africa is the place of origin of the human species, exactly as we are today. And if we want to go back further than, say, 200,000 years, then they start looking less and less like modern humans. We start looking at earlier forms of the human species like Homo erectus. And different parts of Africa have got very, very old fossils. But the biggest single country with early fossils is Ethiopia.
I think that's really interesting because Ethiopia is mentioned in the Bible many times, but I don't think people always make that association. Why do you think that Ethiopia is the focus here?
It's purely because of the fossils. Now, when the Bible used the term Ethiopia, it has a slightly different meaning. Most of the time, when the ancient world said Ethiopia, they meant Sudan on a modern map. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when people speak of ancient Ethiopia and ancient Egypt, they're usually meaning Sudan and Egypt. So it's not quite the same place. Now, of course, Sudan and Ethiopia are right next to each other, but there is a slight geographical difference. But in terms of human fossils, it's Ethiopia. I had the good fortune in 2023 to visit the National Museum of Addis Ababa. And I took photographs, and the National Museum has a very early skeleton that the Western world calls Lucy. In Ethiopia, they call Dinkenesh. And that is a skeleton that is 3 million years old. And that is in the National Museum of Addis Ababa.
Oh, which African civilizations or empires stand out most for you and why?
When it comes to African civilization, you've got what are known as the Nile Valley civilizations, ancient Sudan and ancient Egypt. Now, I know that the Egyptians today aren't Black people, but if we went back to the ancient world, they certainly were. Then you have the different empires in West Africa, the most important ones being ancient Ghana, medieval Mali, and the Songhai Empire. Then you have some of the great ones in East Africa. Ethiopia is a great one in East Africa. Then you have the Swahili civilization all the way along the East African coast. This was such a great civilization. Some of the Swahilis were living in houses of between 1 and 5 stories. Yes, you heard that correctly. And so there's a lot of history and heritage. And my most recent area of heritage, if you want to discuss it, is me and my colleagues at the Black Secret. We are producing material on the early history of Nigeria, and that's become a speciality focus for us.
What can you reveal to us that we should be excited about in terms of learning about the early histories of Nigeria?
Some of the discoveries are, I believe it was 1987, a herdsman from northern Nigeria in a Yobe state was digging a well in his compound. And as he was digging, he came across a hard object. What was that hard object, and why was this hard object interesting? Well, he told his local chief, and the word then got to the archaeologists, and then the archaeologists began digging further. And as they dug, they ended up uncovering the oldest boat in Africa and the third oldest boat in the world. And the boat itself was 8.4 meters long, half a meter wide, 5 centimeters thick. And when it was analyzed, it was found to be between 6,000 BC and 6,500 BC. And at that time, that part of the Nigeria region was part of Lake Megachad. So there was a massive lake in that region, and that was part of that river transport type of culture. Africa, boats, did we know any of this? And so consequently, in the history of water transport, the third oldest known boat in the world is now in an African museum in northern Nigeria. Mm. That's something people should know. More archaeology. I came across a 2023 academic paper, and it was written by two African scholars, and it was called Science, Not Black Magic, Metal and Glass Production in Africa. Now, what about that for a title? Metal and glass production. And in that article, they found that the oldest known site in human history where humans were working with iron, smelting iron, was a Nigerian site. It was called Leja, which is in the Nsukka region, southeastern Nigeria. And that site was found to be somewhere around 2,500 years BC, where Africans in that region were smelting iron. So there's a lot of technological history that most of us have no idea about when it comes to African culture.
And I think that's really something interesting that we should focus on, because I'm sure there are other examples of innovations in science, architecture, or governance that shape the world, and that is also overlooked. Are there any other examples you want to share?
Okay, I can give you one that I think would be quite interesting. I was reading the Sunday Times, and an article appeared on the 23rd of May, 1999. And the article was called Jungle Reveals Traces of Sheba's Fabled Kingdom. That's what the article said. And as I read the article, I found out they were wrong. This has got nothing to do with the Queen of Sheba. And a lot of their details in the article was wrong. But the bits they got right was Dr. Patrick Darling, a British archaeologist, was surveying a site in southwestern Nigeria, and the site was called Erido. And they found that Erido had a wall going all the way around the city, and that wall was 100 miles long. Mm. They found that the wall was accompanied by a ditch, and that ditch would be the equivalent of a moat. And from the bottom of the moat to the top of the wall was 70 feet. And if you have 100-mile wall with a 70-foot ditch and wall going all the way around, that would enclose an area of 400 square miles. And they found that this 400 square mile city was only 1,200 years old, which means 800 AD. And they used the word only. Right, how many cities in 800 AD had 400 square miles?
Wasn't that the only city?
That's the thing. And they used the phrase only 1,200. I've got the article, only 1,200 years old. 800 AD, that is off the scale. So what it means then is this region is a part of the urban history of the world. And so there are traditions that the people in Nigeria have that a queen called Bilikiso Sumbo had something to do with the construction of that city. She would have been a Yoruba queen, so this is a chapter in Yoruba ancient history. 800 AD, a 400 square mile city. This isn't the only example, but these are the kinds of discoveries that we are finding that is changing our view of what we consider African history to be.
I think that's really enlightening because I don't think everyone knows that.
No, let's not be front. None of us know that. Let's not be front. Yeah. I've spoken to Nigerians about this. They don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I have to show them the article. And then people will pretend, yeah, I learned that as a child. No, you didn't. Because had you known that, that would have been the first thing that would be coming out of your mouth.
Yeah. Let's be those skeptics now. And I'll ask the question, how do you know that?
Google Sunday Times, 23rd of May, 1999. Google the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail also had the same story. They opened with a question. Was the Queen of Sheba really a black woman from Nigeria? Now, why am I quoting the Daily Mail? What does the Daily Mail think of black people? And by the way, that's the way you build up evidence. You don't quote what people like you say. You quote people who don't like you say, because once you present it like that, then there's no argument. You can't say, well, you black people, what, the Daily Mail? Come on.
Are there little known stories from African history that always leaves people amazed, or even yourself amazed, that you really like to hear or talk about?
I mean, let me give you one that, again, a Yoruba example. There is a Nigerian professor called Ekpo Ayo, and he is at the time the head of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. And he published a seminal book called 2000 Years of Nigerian Art. And in that book, he tells a story of a Yoruba queen called Oni Oluwo walking around the capital city of Yoruba land called Ife, and her regalia was splashed by mud. And the result then was she ordered the paving of the city of Ile Ife. Do you see? So that's what the story says. Now you could say, but this is nonsense, oral tradition. But get this, pavements have actually been found. The archaeologists have actually found those pavements. And one of the things that was used to make the pavements was corn cobs. And why corn cobs is kind of controversial is corn cobs are of American origins.
Oh,
and since since the pavements are thought to have been made 1000 AD, 1100 AD, that means that some people in what is today Nigeria were in contact with people from the Americas, the Native Americans. Do you see? And this is 400 years before Christopher Columbus. Can you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So again, that raises all kinds of questions that we could be exploring.
Yeah. With that in mind, how did Africa's trade networks and knowledge systems and cultures influence other parts of the world?
That's a powerful question that you've asked. And let me give you an answer from, there was a Journal of African History, and there was a journal article that appeared in 1972, and it was called The Growth of Trade Among the Igbos Before 1800. And they found the burial of an Igbo king, and his burial is 9th century, 10th century, something like that. So somewhere between 800 AD and 1000 AD. And they found among the burials 165,000 glass beads. And those glass beads were of Indian manufacture.
Mm.
And they speculate. So, in other words, the glass beads from India, that's known. And the speculation is possibly some of those glass beads came from Venice.
Wow.
So, India, known. Venice, speculation. So that tells us that trade networks existed that certainly connected India to Africa, possibly connected Venice to Africa. And if we now start to get with how did those corn cobs end up in those Ife pavements, Ife Yoruba land pavements, then that raises all kinds of questions. And consequently, the idea of a backward, primitive Africa, knowing nothing about the outside world, and the rest of the world knowing nothing about Africa, we have to, as the young people say, dead that.
Mm. And why do you think it's important, not just for people of African descent, but for everyone globally to understand Africa's global contributions?
I think one of the issues is if you speak to people from different parts of the world, you will get the sense that everybody knows European heritage. Some people know Chinese, Indian, possibly Arab heritage. And if you embrace, in particular, Arab heritage and make it a part of world history, then you're being anti-racist. Does that make sense? But where is African heritage in all of this? And what you'll find is that most people know nothing about Africa's heritage, and they don't think that knowing nothing is a problem. And so a lot of people are comfortable with the idea that Africa is not a part of the heritage producing part of the world. So they assume that there's nothing there. They assume that there's no heritage there. And unfortunately, that is the way that so much of Africa is seen.
Africa once thrived with powerful economies, thriving trade routes, as you just described. What lessons can modern societies, entrepreneurs, and communities draw from that history?
A lot. Let me give you a recent example. I do have, certain connections to people in Ethiopia. There's a project that me and some of my colleagues are working on. So we have met, some of Ethiopia's politicians. We met the mayor of Addis Ababa. We met the deputy prime minister. And one of the topic of conversations that kept coming up is we're building a dam. We're building a dam. We're building a dam. They pulled it off. They pulled it off 2 weeks ago. So they started in 2011 and they inaugurated it 2 weeks ago, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. They built it themselves, they funded it themselves, and it is the largest water hydroelectric dam in Africa. And it's one of the largest ones in the world. And they pulled it off just to show that it's global impact. You had the ruler of Sudan was at the launch. You had the ruler of Djibouti was at the launch. You had the ruler of Kenya was at the launch. You had the ruler of Barbados was at the launch. Her Excellency Mia Motley, and she even spoke at the launch. So you can Google all of this. This is all here. Now, why were they able to pull this off? When I was in Ethiopia, the ambassador at the time, Ambassador Meles Desta, had shown me a video of some Ethiopians had found a wall that was in southern Ethiopia, a region called Dawuro, and the archaeologists have measured the wall, and it's in different sections, but when you add up the sections, it's 1,000 kilometers of walling. Right? And these were built somewhere between the 16th and the 18th centuries. And then when we look in the history, you then find the Ethiopian city of Gondar. Again, people watching can Google this. Is a city of castles built in the 1600s. The city of Lalibela was built in the 12th century, is a city of underground churches. Again, people listening can Google this. And if we go back 2,000 years, the city of Aksum in Ethiopia is a city of massive obelisks. And the obelisks have got windows and doors carved into them. And the largest standing one has one door and 9 stories worth of windows carved into it. It's a solid block. But that means that 2,000 years ago, people knew about multi-story structures. Why? Because you can see it in this decorated obelisk. Now, if there's a tradition that you know about that says that you've been building grand things for 2,000 years, you have no problem crowdfunding and building projects today, such as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Do you see?
Yeah.
When the dam was launched, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, said that all Black people should come and see this. And he said that in his speech. And from what I've seen of the film footage, I agree. Okay, now what's that got to do with anything? Well, many other parts of Africa have grand constructions too. And those grand constructions sends out a message that we can do. And that we can do message needs to be drilled into everybody. Now, for those of us from the Caribbean, we are, of course, of slave origins. And the whole point of us or our ancestors being captured and enslaved, everyone knows that enslaved people were captured to do work. What most people don't realize is they were captured to do work they were already doing. And so mass enslavement is a technological transfer. It's bringing African technology to the Americas. And the whole point of it was to benefit Europeans in America and Europeans in Europe. But it's a technological transfer. And one of the reasons was to capture African technology. So to show you an example of what I mean, did I mention somewhere that Nigeria has the oldest iron smelting site in the world? So once you know that, and once you know that there's a 4,500 years iron smelting tradition, once you know that, capturing Africans, bringing them to places like Jamaica, a news article came out a few years ago. The article was written based on the research of University of London science historian. Her name was Dr. Jenny Bulstrode. And her article talked about how 76 enslaved Jamaican metallurgists were the people that actually created the court smelting process, which is how you turn scrap iron into good quality iron. And that was one of the important processes that created the Industrial Revolution. 76 enslaved Jamaicans were responsible for that. And once you know that there's a 4,500 year iron smelting tradition, you can now see how that could have happened. Do you see? And that's why knowing this history and heritage is important to entrepreneurs today, because it shows we can do.
I think that's really interesting and a perspective that is very eye-opening. If African history were taught truthfully and fully, not just in schools, but also to adults as well, how might that reshape global relationships among different cultures as well?
We would come with the same amount of respect as the Chinese come with. You see, people don't know the history of China. They don't know which king, which dynasty, whatever. But they know China has a history. They know that the kings were there, the dynasties were there, the palaces were there. Buddhism or whatever it is that they were on, Confucianism was there. And there's a certain respect that is accorded to Chinese people because of that. And then when it comes to us as Black people, we don't get that respect because it is assumed that what we had wasn't there.
Yeah.
It's assumed that what was there was jungle savagery, and you people should be grateful that you were captured and put onto slave ships because you're civilized now. Do you see? Yeah. And that's what we are taught instead.
I want to come to this quote from Marcus Garvey: "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots."
I agree. But what the Honorable Marcus Garvey didn't know was the extent to which what he said was true. Do you see? In other words, he was right, but boy, it was so much bigger because when he said that, what we knew about Africa's history was very, very much in its infancy. What you had was the different people having a jigsaw piece. So the Honorable Marcus Garvey would speak about the role of the ancient Egyptians in world history. He was right. Yes, the ancient Egyptians, as I said, used to be Black people. He spoke about the role of ancient Ethiopia. What he meant by that was Sudan. He was right. What he didn't realize is the evidence is much more widely spread across Africa than even he thought the evidence was spread over. And let me give you something that I discovered as I was doing this research. All right. I came across an article in the Journal of the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, and the article was in 1909. And let me set the scene. The Nigeria region had been conquered, colonized, and now English people, British people were ruling. And they set up schools. And the idea of setting up schools was to obviously teach the jungle savages. I'm putting jungle savages in inverted commas. Teaching them to read and write, because this is the civilizing process. And one of those missionaries was the Reverend J.K. McGregor, and he submitted this article to the Journal of the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland about his experiences in Nigeria teaching the quote-unquote savages civilization. And this is what he wrote in his journal article. I've got it here, so I'm going to quote it to you. In a class I was teaching, a pupil deeply resented the statement that the civilization of the people in Nigeria was primitive because they had no writing. He declared they had a writing called Nsibidi. This happened in April 1905. As I was at the beginning of a new term, I set myself to find out all I could about Nsibidi. Now, can you see that's a mic drop moment? And so what then happened was the Reverend J.K. McGregor submitted this article to the journal, and the article was called Some Notes on Nsibidi, or an ancient writing system. And this writing system was used in what would today be Eastern Nigeria. The Igbos used it. They didn't start it. It was a different Nigerian ethnic group that started it, but the Igbos ended up running with it. Okay, so that was what was known in 1909. I came across an article in 2007, and the article says that ceramics, that is pottery, with Nsibidi symbols on them have been excavated. And the earliest of those excavations with the symbols on them is 5th century CE. That means 400 and something AD. That means that writing system has been around since at least 400 AD. Are we feeling this? Okay, now, what's that got to do with anything? I think many of us will have watched the film Black Panther.
Yeah.
And the fictional civilization of Wakanda has its own writing system. And the writing system was designed by the production designer of the film. Her name was Hannah Beachler. And she created this fictitious script for this fictitious place. And the script was called, Wakandan. And Wakandan is a modernized version of Nsibidi. That means the African Americans that put that film together, Black Panther, knew about this early Nigerian script, Nsibidi, and made it the national script of Wakanda, having modernized it. Are we feeling this? So one of the ways that people said that you Africans are primitive is you had no writing. Well, we've now killed that. Then it becomes you had no buildings. Didn't I say something about 100-mile wall?
Yeah.
Didn't I say something about 1,000-kilometer wall? Yeah. Obelisks, underground churches, castles. And now the biggest achievement in our time, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Boats going back to between 6 and 6,500 BC, third oldest known one in the world. You can see how the game is changing in how we present our history and heritage.
It's so enlightening. What would you say is the one takeaway, because this is only a snippet, what we're discussing today, of that historical journey? What is the one takeaway that you would like the audience to have?
The takeaway is this: there's a lot of history and heritage that we have that we can be proud of. Even during the periods where our pride was destroyed, even during the periods of mass enslavement, there is a history and heritage to be proud of. And genuinely proud of, because the area of technological transfer, the evidence of Black intellectualism. Do you see? So let me give you a few examples to illustrate my point. In the 16th century, there was a Black person from Africa. We don't know which part of Africa, but we know he was from Africa. He was captured, enslaved, given the name Juan Latino, and ended up in Spain. He ended up as professor of Latin in the University of Granada, and his books of Latin poetry have survived, where he's regarded as the best scholar in Spain in the 16th century in Latin. Now, that shouldn't have happened, right? This is someone who's captured and enslaved. And then I found out that wasn't the only example. There was a gentleman who was captured and enslaved from possibly what is today Cameroon. He ended up with the name Abraham Petrovich Hannibal, ended up enslaved in Russia, where the Russian ruler Peter the Great took a liking to him, and he ended up rising through the ranks of the army to the position of generalissimo. And the Russians have preserved his palace. Yes, he had a palace, and I can tell you where it is: 28 and 29 Tchaikovsky Street in St. Petersburg. Again, people can Google this, they can check it for themselves. And this summer house at Petroskovy has also been preserved. And he is the great grandfather of Russia's greatest writer, Pushkin. And Pushkin knew about his African ancestor and was very proud of his African ancestor, and even wrote a book on his African ancestor called The Maw of Peter the Great. You know, maw was the term that was used for Africans. Then you get another example. A black child is enslaved by slave traders in Ethiopia, ends up being sold into Arabia, ends up being sold into India, and he became Malik Ambar, one of the kings in India. And his burial and the burial of his wife, Karima Bibi, still exists today. It's one of the grand monuments in the state of Ahmadnagar. Again, people can Google this, and you can take a look at Malik Ambar's tomb and his wife Karima Bibi's tomb. It's still being kept up in Ahmadnagar. And there's so many examples that you can point to. Someone was captured and enslaved, and this is what happened. So a woman was captured and enslaved from Senegal. She ended up in the Americas. Her name was Phyllis Wheatley. She became an acknowledged poet. She was able to speak 5 different languages. Do you see? And these are the kinds of examples. And there was one that really blew my mind. There was a Jamaican gentleman called Francis Williams. Have you heard of Francis? In fact, that's your surname, isn't it?
It is.
Francis Williams. Okay, let me explain the science on Francis Williams. There's an Indian historian called Farah Dobaiwala, and he gave a lecture in London on the 30th of January, and that lecture was about Francis Williams. Now, Francis Williams, he wasn't a slave, but his parents were. And something went down where their enslaver died and left the inheritance to them. I don't know how that happened, but that happened. And so Francis Williams was 1 degree separated from slavery. That same Francis Williams, according to Farah Dobaiwala, became interested in mathematics and astronomy and came to Britain, and he was proposed for membership of the Royal Society, which is the Royal Society of Science. And they rejected his application, and they rejected his application purely on the account of his complexion. That's what's in news stories. And so the result was he was actually in correspondence with the top scientists in Britain at the time. And one of the projects that the scientists were working on was the trajectory of Halley's Comet. You know Halley's Comet? Yeah. And Francis Williams was one of the people working on that project. And people knew about Halley's Comet, but they couldn't predict when it was going to return. And the person that did the calculation and accurately predicted its return was Francis Williams. And there is a painting of him. And what Farah Dobaiwala did was to analyze the painting to show where in the painting is Halley's Comet depicted in the painting. and showing how Francis Williams did the calculations to prove its trajectory. And so there's an online video that Don Baiwala did, and you can Google it, and it's called Francis Williams Portrait of a Genius. And yeah, it's a very, very inspiring story.
That's absolutely amazing. I think you have shared so much knowledge with us in such a short space of time. I want to thank you so much for your time and for being a guest on this podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. And if people want more information, check out my site. My company is called The Black Secret Education Project.
Thank you very much, Robin. If you'd like further details about Robin Walker and to explore Black history even further, then please follow links in the show notes.